Hi there, and welcome back to this free online learning course, Is God Dead? I'm Christopher Driscoll, scholar of religion, culture, and spirituality. This is the final section of Lesson 3, which has explored the key philosophers and their ideas that shape the Is God Dead discussion. The thinkers we've discussed in Lesson 3 have included Rene Descartes, David Hume, Ludwig Feuerbach, and now Karl Marx. Now, each of these philosophers is famous in their own right, and each was invested in the topic of God and religion and understanding it, and therefore they shaped what will become the Is God Dead discourse. They're not the only thinkers who will. There will be many more who we discuss, but these are kind of like the four key white Western philosophers that point us in the direction of Friedrich Nietzsche. And also I've noted I'm presenting Lesson 3 as 4 distinct videos on YouTube, and this way each video will be much shorter, and those of you who are here to learn about one of these thinkers will not need to watch a much longer video. Also, for the sake of time and interest, I'm going to try and present this last section in a soft-spoken manner, but without the added hand-rubbing ASMR. But I want to try and be sensitive to the content. And my sense is that most of the folks who are here for the content. This section of Lesson 3 covers the guy who is perhaps, at least in the Western world, the most infamous philosopher of all time, Karl Marx. You know, I'm coming from the United States, and many in my audience are, and he is a reviled character here. Now, hate him or love him, he offers one of the most useful theories of religion that's ever been produced. I'll tell you about it in this video and talk about how his theory was really the result of taking Feuerbach's ideas seriously and, ironically, accusing Feuerbach of not having taken his own ideas seriously enough. That is, in a way, he kind of out-Feuerbachs Feuerbach. But first, if you need to catch up on the previous lessons, click the link up top or in the description, and you can find Lessons 1 and 2, as well as the first parts of Lesson 3. Okay, so what's the deal with Marx? Marx is one of the widest ranging and prolific philosophers ever. His range extends far beyond the scope of Is God Dead? The major takeaway for this free online course is that Marx emphasizes the relationship between God and society in a way that's both made possible by Feuerbach's earlier work, and Marx also moves way beyond Feuerbach in arguing that religion is an acute problem for the social world, and it must be transcended. Getting to this point of our understanding, however, requires a bit of background. In the previous section, I briefly remarked on how Feuerbach and Marx are both left Hegelians. Dating back to the early 19th century, Hegel had shifted Western philosophy away from a focus on being and towards one of becoming. Hegel gets us to start thinking about reality and truth, not as trans-historical or fixed in time, but as an unfolding process. And he offers a system of thought that can account for change over time. And we call this system dialectical materialism, the Hegelian dialectic. As an example, during the Renaissance, the painter Raphael da Sanzo painted the foyer of the Sistine Chapel with what's remembered as the School of Athens. As luck would have it, I have a print of it hanging behind me. It's right here. It'll be hard to see, so I'll put a fuller copy of it up on the screen. The painting is a who's who of famous Westerners, particularly philosophers. Now, in the history of Western philosophy, there's been a long-standing debate over how to organize truth according to either what we call subjectivism or idealism, and according to objectivism or materialism. Now here, in this painting, with his hand pointed towards the sky, is Plato. Plato's an idealist. He points up. Where is truth? Truth is up in the logos. Truth is up somewhere else, and in different ways it is revealed to us. Next to him, here, pointed with his hand kind of focused down to the earth, is Aristotle. And Aristotle is remembered as an empiricist and a materialist. And the tension across Western philosophy is kind of remembered with those two figures, debating whether truth is revealed to us from some other place where truth rests, or whether truth only comes to us through our experiences. Now, the innovation of Hegel was that he offered a compelling third way. What we call the Hegelian dialectic is Hegel's effort to synthesize idealism and materialism. And he does this through the concepts of a thesis, and antithesis, and a synthesis. A thesis you might think of as anything big or small as far as a proposition or a truth claim goes. Then you might think of the antithesis as, you guessed it, the opposite of that. And in history, any kind of truth claim also offers its counterpoint. Why? Because in our rational minds, any positive proposition can also be thought of logically as a negative proposition, regardless of whether our experiences show that it should be thought of that way or not. Hence, people have different opinions. And so, Hegel's system seeks to synthesize both sides of this in and as history. This helps to shift the focus of Western philosophy from being and towards becoming. History is that synthesis, the product of objectification of what's potential into what's actual. This is the thing I mentioned a moment ago that we call dialectical materialism. And I'll put a diagram on the screen to help demonstrate it. Truth comes by way of that synthesis of both sides, of the tension, of the dialectic. In this process, the subject objectifies everything else, while the everything else objectifies the subject. This process is so thoroughly dialectical. Hegel argues that it creates history as it unfolds through our experiences. Now, this is just scratching the surface of Hegel, but there are two takeaways from this for us. The first is understanding this dialectical process. Thesis plus antithesis equals synthesis. And the second has to do with what we call teleological progress. Is history fated towards progress? Lodged within dialectical materialism for Hegel is an assumption that history unfolds in a positive direction, pointing towards or moved by what he calls Geist, spirit. This is an expression of God, God's will, God's agency, but it also ends up meaning that history serves as a kind of stand-in for God. Absolute knowledge, if we don't have it now, will eventually be arrived at because the dialectical process is immutable. It's unstoppable. History serves to ground truth and our trust in truth. This teleological point, telos meaning goal, teleological meaning goal-oriented. Is history arriving at a higher expression of itself? Is the ultimate aim of history to reveal the fullest expression of God? These are questions that the Hegelians were asking. Now, like Feuerbach, Marx is remembered as a left Hegelian. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean, Chris? Right Hegelians trusted time for the unfolding of objective knowledge. They didn't really champion politics because politics would happen regardless. Right Hegelians regarded any given contemporary moment as the highest expression of the order of nature and the universe. Things could not, as it were, be other than they are now or in that moment of space and time because God is represented there. The left Hegelians thought we could speed up history's unfolding. We were active change agents in the world. In fact, the dialectical process required active political participation precisely because participation was treated as closer to objective knowledge than passivity. So we were change agents in the world. We were the hands of God, so to speak. That basic tension unfolds in a number of directions in Western philosophy. As it concerns Marx, it specifically informs his version of a system of thought. And this we refer to as historical materialism. As what it does, what Marx does is forcefully infuse the notion of spirit unfolding in history into a materialist history. He sets down the actual concern over metaphysics, but he keeps the system of metaphysics, the logic and the structure of metaphysics in place, and he applies it to the material world. Hence, he ends up offering one of the most robust, influential political philosophies of all times. For Marx, humans are limited creatures that exist in a world where material limitation is the defining characteristic of existence. There are limited resources to use, limited time to use them in, and limited physical ability that can go into such use. But in navigating our limitation, humans have developed an economic system that funnels limitation into a benefit. We use our finite abilities and resources to produce products that help to navigate this limitation. We make things. Now, as this system grows and as it becomes routinized, for Marx there emerged two basic groups. He labels them the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. You might have heard of these terms. The bourgeoisie are the people who own the means of production, the capitalists. This is why Marx is hated in the United States. The proletariat, on the other hand, are paid by the bourgeoisie to produce goods with the bourgeoisie's resources. Marx sees this basic system as synthetic in the sense of Hegel's synthesis. Both sides rely on the tension between each other. This is the tension between thesis and antithesis. The proletariat and the bourgeoisie in this way are naturally antagonistic towards one another. But Marx also recognized that this relationship is necessarily exploitative, in that it disconnects the producer of a good or product from the good or service. This disconnection is what we refer to as alienation. Capitalism alienates the workers from their labor, which is to say, capitalism holds us apart from the equity and the value of the products that we produce. Alienation, then, is when the worker is turned into an object because it no longer matters what we make. What matters in the system is that we are makers. That is, think of the assembly line as an example of this. All of this is part of what Marx calls commodity fetishism, the transformation of goods into things with artificial value, and the transformation of humans into objects only valuable for what we do, what we make. Marx thinks the system inverts the natural order of things. Objects are of no real value, and humans are worth immense value. But capitalism screws all that up, inverting it. And therefore, for Marx, it becomes our task to fight against this system of exploitation. We produce things to respond to our limits, but in modern capitalist economy, we are alienated from our product. And so rather than correcting for our limits, the things we produce end up merely exacerbating those limits, becoming problems instead of solutions to problems. And here's where you might shift gears and start to think of the analogy of drugs. When you first take a drug, maybe an opiate, or it could be a hard illicit drug like cocaine, or it could be a pain pill like a Lortab or something like that. At first, for many people, those drugs work. They make the pain go away. Then dependence unfolds for those people. And therefore, they start, especially with opiates, people begin to feel the pain whenever they're not taking that medicine. This creates a feedback loop, a negative feedback loop. This is what we call drug dependence. And this is the model, this is the exact model that Marx is thinking about when he shifts gears to think about religion and its relationship to capitalism. The alienation continually snowballs until the goods produced by the proletariat are almost entirely used and owned by the bourgeoisie. There's no value left. Does the antidepressant make you feel better, or does the antidepressant merely serve the ends of the person or the corporation who's selling the antidepressant? I'm not making a position on that point. I'm posing it as a question to help in understanding Marx. This system, he says, perpetuates itself as the proletariat end up without the time or the produced resources to change their material circumstances. This is the alienation of labor, as he calls it. The laborer is disconnected from the very products we produce. The living conditions of the proletariat grow worse and worse as they have fewer resources to deal with their limitations, creating a system of oppression that cannot be escaped, but, he says, it might be fought. Now, all of that gets us to what I have the class read from Marx. Marx's critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, one of the most difficult passages, one of the most difficult readings in this course. This is a major materialist critique of religion. It begins with him saying that the criticism of religion is the prerequisite of all criticism. And one of the things we do in the class is explore why it is he could be so clear and confident that one must critique religion in order for any subsequent critique to matter at all. In this piece, he offers one of his most famous passages that also infuriate people in the United States. He says, "Religion is the opium of the people." Criticism here in this piece is not abstract. It involves Germany specifically. Hegel's philosophy of right had the implication of justifying and defending the modern German state. Marx didn't like this hope that Hegel was putting into German history because there was no real German history. Germanness didn't actually exist yet. Marx is saying they haven't really moved beyond the problem of the ancient Greeks. That is, they were a confederation of unaffiliated people with no unified history to turn to in the making of a collective national identity. This is Germany, Germanness that Marx is talking about. Hegel is a high German idealist. Goethe, contemporary of his. Germanness gets created in culture. Kulturkampf. It's when this comes online. But prior to that, and many would say post that, after that as well, Germanness is little more than an idea. The German Empire did not even begin officially. The nation of Germany was not established until 1871. Then the Weimar Republic begins from 1918 until 1933. And then in 1933, as I'm sure most of you know, Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany rise. A part of this tension, as well as a huge motivator for the anti-Semitism seen in so many of these figures in the 19th century in Germany, has to do with the way that there was no sense of German identity, and there hadn't been for roughly 16 or 1700 years. Germany was a loose confederation of tribes dating back into antiquity. The closest term we have used in Roman times or Greek times to refer to Germans is barbarian. Teutonic in some cases, but barbarian. The Germans were problems for civilization. They were bearded warriors who fought with one another, and they fought with civilization. As Christianity enters into the Roman world, soon more and more of these Germanic tribes and clans within the tribal system, as the Ostrogoths, the Visigoths, all of these groups slowly begin to be Christianized. And it's their Christian identity that's ultimately used to unify them with an ethnic or a sense of national identity. Over time, Germany becomes a kind of vague notion meant to refer to the land that we know of as Germany today, but the peoples who lived there. And twice, first with Wojtyła and second with Martin Luther, twice the Christian Bible was translated into the vernacular language for German tribes, essentially setting in motion a sense of German identity. This means, though, that German identity is inextricably connected to Christian identity. But what then does that mean for us when we come to realize that the critique of religion is a prerequisite for all critique. Religion is an opiate. Marx comes to this conclusion with or without a sense of German history. This piece that he's writing is pointed in the direction of understanding what this awareness means for a community, that is Germans, who have hitched their wagon to a religious identity in lieu of an actual national identity. Hegel, Marx maintained, was putting way too much trust into a notion of Germanness. To be German in any sense starts with being Christian. It did, all the way up until World War II and National Socialism. Because, you might say, of the deficit imposed by this Christian identity serving as a stand-in for German identity, anti-Semitism is kind of culturally lodged into the community. If there is no unifying German identity, and if we cannot trust Christian identity, then we'll find a villain in the form of the Jews, whose story is interwoven with the Christian story in such a way that they become an easy scapegoat for a very difficult, complicated problem. Now, I'm not saying Marx himself was anti-Semitic, and there's a long history. Lots of people have written about how much, to the degree to which these folks are anti-Semitic, one way or the other. Marx thinks religion is a mask, an illusion, an inverted consciousness of the world that always suggests either that things as they are not that bad, that is alienation, or that alienation doesn't really exist. He would hold this true for Christians as for Jews. But the specific problem he's addressing has to do with German national identity being so wed to Christian religious identity. For the proletariat, religion is a response to alienation that does not respond to alienation. What I mean is that religion always marks the problem of oppression and exploitation brought about by alienation. But ironically, even as it points ultimately towards the problems of the economic system, religion either suggests that the system is not all that bad, or it causes a person or group to not revolt against the system. So in this way, it makes perfect sense that a nation like the United States, which celebrates capitalism to such a high degree, would hate someone like Karl Marx. Capitalism requires alienation. Religion is the primary means of alienation. It's the first industry, perhaps, you might say, or the second. Along this point, Marx offers subtle comment. He says, religious suffering is, at one and the same time, the expression of real suffering, and it's a protest against real suffering. And he goes on, he says, religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of a soulless condition. It is the opium of the people. Take that for what you will. It says, it is the opium of the people. We have to give up our illusions about our condition in order that our condition might improve. This here is why he says the criticism of religion is therefore in embryo the criticism of that veil of tears of which religion is the halo. Wow, that's powerful. So religion is the thing that stands in the way between us and our happiness. But because of that, religion itself is not bad. It's more like religion is a denial mechanism. And here the drug and dependency metaphors or analogies work together. We are in denial of a kind of collective neurosis, to use Freud's language later on. Religion holds us in denial of our actual circumstances, and it does so by convincing us that our actual circumstances are anything but that. For Marx, religion, and I'll add the theorization of it, is a human response to both limitation and alienation that ironically helps to maintain the alienation. By not criticizing the religious beliefs like heaven or God or afterlife, or even worship and community, the religious proletariat ends up perpetuating our own oppression. This can happen through the belief that God wills our situation, or that God is the only thing able to bring about change to the system, or that heaven will provide an end to the suffering and the alienation and our limitations, as well as a million other ideas. This is not limited to theism and the belief in God either. Many humanist or non-theist, atheist perspectives believe in the unbounded potential of humanity. This belief in the limitless possibilities of humans is itself oppressive because it is an existential lie. It is essentially a religious claim. Now remember, for Marx, everything and everyone are limited by the materials on earth. And any perspective that suggests otherwise is one of these existential lies aimed at keeping a person's eyes covered to the reality of their oppression. And this is what Marx says about Feuerbach. In the end, he suggests of Feuerbach that Feuerbach wants to throw out the religion because religion gets in the way of knowing ourselves. But Feuerbach also remains focused on an idealist vision of knowing ourselves. Marx is saying here that Feuerbach is throwing the bathwater out, but not the real problem. Baby Jesus, in other words. And he concludes, he says, another famous passage, "The philosopher has interpreted the world. The point, however, is to change it." If criticism is about making the world better, then criticism must begin with criticism of religion, because religion is that thing that makes people think that the world is not as bad as it really is. Now here I want to shift gears as a way of wrapping this up by focusing on one of my favorite rap songs from The Coup by Boots Riley, "Me and Jesus the Pimp in the 79 Granada last night." I'm going to play the song in just a moment. I'm going to throw it into the video so that in case YouTube does not like that I've done so, I can easily extract it. But I'll leave a link to the song in the show notes, and so you can pause now and take a listen to the song.
Well, he was smiling like a vulture as he rolled up the horticulture. Ignited it and said, "I hope the vapors don't insult you." What I replied, denied, but mixing weed and hot. He said it was 9, looking down like he agreed a lot. Board said we need a plot. I comply, let's lead a spot. Hopped in the Granada, he's impressed by the beat I got. His name is Jesus, but his pimp name is Jesus. Slapped a hold of pieces with his plastic prosthesis. "Nigga, don't you know that I'm your daddy?" said he. This is true, plus he schooled me for my Mackin degree. Never flee, try not to flee, make niggas pee when you stick around. It's me and my mama had found, told me to put it down. I press the gas to the ground to show that I'm a hound. Make sure they gear up a sound, it's heard throughout the town. 30 years ago, Jesus could pull a hoe quick, but now we 50 and his belly hang lower than his dick. Philosophy that he spit, stuck in my memory chip. And now we putting in a disc of Gladys Knight in the pit. And then that shit start to skip. He said somebody must have scratched it, put the 40 to his lips and brought the contents down the hatchet. Now since my adolescence, cause of his pimp lessons, smack my woman in the dental just for asking silly questions. Relationship reduction, either rock the box or suction. Ain't got no close partner socially, I can't function. From the penny was scribed on how to survive. Don't be Microsoft, be Macintosh with a hard drive. Used to tell me all the time to keep a bitch broke. Did I mention that my mama was his #1 hope? Clunked the 40 on the floor and placed his palm on the dash and wheezed out, "Come on, man, make this motherfucker mash. Ain't gon' mash too fast, cause my tags ain't right." Me and Jesus the pimp in the 79 Granada last night. City lights from far away can make you drop your jaw. Sparkling light sequins on the transvestite at Mardi Gras. There's beauty in the cracks of the cement. When I was 5, I hopped over them wherever we went to prevent whatever it was that could break my mama's back. Little did I know that it would roll up in a Cadillac. And matter of fact, she couldn't see him like a cataract. And on the track, she went from beautiful to battle axe. And back at home, she would would cry into her pillow, vomit in the commode. I was 6 years old, I would crawl onto her lap and we would hug and hold. Never knew how she was suffering for my food and clothes. She asked me what I thought of Jesus when he broke off some bread. I said he missing an arm and he seemed like a pee-pee head. She said don't cut and my teeth to go brush and get ready for bed and the toilet to flush. With tears in mama's eyes, I was her everything. Before she went out on the stroll, she tucked me into bed and sang. You're just too beautiful for words. You're just too beautiful for words. You're just too beautiful for words. I see the red and white lights as the ambulance flies. Reminds me of midnight in the dope fiend's eyes. And my 9-year-old self as paramedics leave. Left to ball my eyes out on the neighbor's sleep. To give illustrations that are clear and clean, I'll take you 2 hours back before this scene. Early in the morning when the sun starts to creep, when the birds start to chirp and crackheads go to sleep. Moms was coming in, I heard her keys go clink, wearing nothing but pumps, bikini and fake mink. Even though she served for $50 a pop, hardly had enough for rent after Jesus recopped. That day the landlady got a rent before we got his knot. Slammed mama's head against the front boat lock. Then the pimp with one arm done horn. Reached back and plowed into her head like a farm. Never saw the act like in the back I was cussing. Heard the black blabber 20 head crack percussion and body blows. Her body broke from bolos to the spine. I was hysterical crying. All she could do was whine. She didn't even have the strength to say I love you, boo. But I said it to her and she knew that I knew. She was dead by the time the ambulance got on the case. But I never will forget the plastic hand stuck in her face. Stop at the intersection to ask Jesus about directions. Go to Frisco, I got very friendly vocal inflections. Mama left at MacArthur to continue in flight. Me and Jesus, the pimp in the 79 Granada last night. The raindrop giant pearls, God was pissing on the world. Or that old man who was snoring rode on over in Earl. My temperature gauge, red, cold, and blistering. Spinning wheels made a piece of asphalt history. This was Jesus' debut out the penitentiary. 15 years, but it seemed like a century. See, he went in the pen for some other murder drama. 12 years old, I wrote him a quote, I wanna be a pimp, comma. You accidentally killed my mom's, no player Haitian points. We know how bitches act, shit, exclamation point. At first it was a setup move, then it was the truth. His letters were the only friend that I had as a youth. But his lopsided game, see, was really counterfeit. So my little son, Dominic, thinks that I'm a dick. Cause I was running around like a little baby Jesus. To me, women had to be saints, hoes, and skeezers. And I don't think that it's gonna end till we make revolution. But who gon' make the shit if we worship prostitution? Ain't no women finna die for the same old conclusion. Put their life on the line so some other pimp can use them. Pulled into a vacant lot, the road to recovery. Pulled out my pistol as we brushed against the shrubbery. Jesus said, why the hell you pointing the gap? So I pulled a piece of game I could use out the hat. I said, this trip is over, we ain't finna ride on. This is for my mental and my mama that I cried on. Microsoft motherfuckers let bygones be bygones. But since I'm Macintosh, I'ma double click your icon. He struggled for life, then gave up the fight. Me and Jesus the pimp in the 79 Granada last night.
In the song, Boots Riley is critiquing capitalism, religion. In the song, Boots Riley is critiquing capitalism, religion, and sexism as interrelated networks of oppression. that short-circuit the life options of all people through that oppression. For Boots, religion is necessarily oppressive because it is fundamental to the economic system. Women end up the victims of both religion and economics as the two systems work together to prevent women from flourishing. The pimp's name is Jesus, and that pimp killed his mother. This is a metaphor for what religion does to women. Particularly, I guess he's focused on monotheistic traditions, and so we should be as well. Well, why does the Catholic Church not allow female leadership, female priests? Whether or not you think that abortion is right or wrong, how is it that God, for so many people, seems so focused on what women do with their bodies? There are many states in the United States right now seeking to make it illegal to transport a minor across state lines in order to have an abortion. Her parents could be charged if they do that. There's more than one way to treat women like prostitutes. When we tell them what to do with their bodies, there's no difference between demanding a woman give you a blowjob or demanding a woman have a baby. There's no difference at all. It's sheer control, meant to conceal, meant to stay in denial of what religion is doing, or rather not doing, for us. If alienation is the separation of the laborer from their product, prostitution is arguably the highest or lowest form of alienation, as the laborer becomes the product. Women become the value of either. What does Boots say? To me, women had to be saints, hoes, or skeezers. Women had to be the paragon of virtue in churches, or they had to be whores who we don't talk about, we keep behind the scenes in the shadows, or they had to be skeezers, which I interpret to mean the women for whom we bring them out in front of the congregation so that our charity can serve them by serving our identity needs, by filling in the void of American identity or the void of German identity. This is how religion works. Boots is suggesting that religion and prostitution are basically in the same business of oppressing women and holding us all in denial because of that. What does he want to do? Jesus killed his mom. He ends up wanting to be Jesus. At first it was a setup move, then it was the truth. Your letters were the only friend that I had as a youth. This is the role religion plays. It's played that for Native American young people, black and brown folks globally. And so a Marxist would say it still plays that role in all of the two-thirds world where religion is so popular today. Now, one of the critiques Boots makes is that religion's influence is oppressive, though fortunately the influence has shrunk over the years. Boots understands that the church has the women, so to speak, and we've seen women make up the majority of church-going folks in the United States. This extends across race, ethnicity, class. Women fill these pews, but in many of those places, women are not allowed the same rights and duties as the men. Now, make no mistake, on the one hand, Jesus is about as ice-cold a pimp name as you might imagine, but he's naming that pimp Jesus in order to critique your Jesus, my Jesus, whoever's got Jesus. That's who he's talking about. Jesus is doing that. His critique is against Jesus, the most well-known religious figure in the Western world. What emerges is a multi-layered critique of women's oppression that he blames on a capitalist system and a religious system that collectively oppresses women. 30 years ago, Jesus could pull a hoe quick, but now he's 50 and his belly hangs lower than his dick. Boots is not just talking about the pimp in that song. When he says this, he's not being caustic for the sake of controversy, but this serves as a powerful metaphor for the way the Christian church, and by extension religion in general, operates in the United States, as well as the declining numbers. Is he describing the death of God? I think he might be, and he's also offering us at least an explanation of why that God might be dying for some people. Who wants to be in bed with a pimp? Boots' critique is against religion, and it corroborates the Marxist ideas I stated above. Religion points towards alienation and oppression. And second, it doesn't do anything about it. This is the drug addiction denial mechanism. Is there any wonder that with the high expression of capitalism we experience today in the United States, we'd have such high rates of belief in God and participation in religion, albeit it's waning. It has, like I mentioned at the beginning of this lesson, or at the beginning of this class. And alongside of that, we have an opiate crisis. People are escaping. People are trying to escape. They'll escape towards religion. They'll escape towards drugs. Now ask yourself, why are so many people on antidepressants? Is it because we have chemical imbalances that create a need for those medicines? Yes, that's true. That's one way of interpreting the situation. Another is interpreting it as the society, the capitalist society that we live in, is so messed up that it's essentially hell on earth and we have to take drugs in order to simply navigate it. Whether you're taking fentanyl patches or whether you're going to church, the question for you is, are you in denial? And if so, is there a concern to get out of denial? Right? I don't want to castigate religious believers. I don't think that Marx has the last word on what religion is. But his critique cannot be responded to simply with ad hominem attack on Marxists or Marx or communists. This is the responsibility of believers to respond to these charges. The evidence for this oppression is rampant. The Catholic Church to this day does not allow women leaders. And many Christian communities, monotheistic traditions, and as well as beyond that, continue to work in lockstep with the oppression of women. Why is that? Boots' songs showing that religion has lost the hold it once had. Its belly is hanging over its belt these days, and Boots thinks that's good. Boots points out the insidiousness of these systems, as the only perceived recourse against the oppression often appears capitulation with the oppression. I'm guilty of this as it concerns Amazon. I absolutely love Amazon. It's so convenient. It is. And what we do with that is an open question. But yeah, I'm not a Marxist. I'm genuinely not. Why am I having us explore this? Because it is incumbent upon us to respond to Marx. The interpretation he's offering of German religious identity is equally applicable to the United States system, and we ignore it at our own peril. Boots is noting that if you can't beat them, join them kind of mentality that so permeates religion, and especially late 20th century capitalism. When he's talking about Jesus getting out of prison, he points out the irony that instead of being furious with Jesus, he wants to be Jesus. Instead of writing off the person that killed his mom, he feels like his only recourse is to live into the shoes of the Jesus that killed his mom. Boots is describing how the pimp game operates cyclically as victims become perpetrators. Look at the Catholic Church sex abuse scandal. Look at the Baptist Church sex abuse scandal. And as the decades unfold, we'll see many of these denominations and organizations have sex abuse scandals hiding under their rugs. Understands religion and pimping, they're different but related ways to do the same thing. Maintain alienation. And what's most insidious or toxic, you might use the term, is that the only response to that oppression is to buy into the system itself. It's kind of like being part of a dysfunctional family. If your family is so dysfunctional that there's only dysfunctional ways to communicate with them, how do you communicate with them in a healthy fashion? This gets to why Marx says the critique of religion is the premise of all critique. If we don't rip off the Band-Aid, if we don't pull back the illusion of life that we live in because of religion, then we'll never arrive at a moment or an opportunity for overcoming our alienation. Effectively, religion, the drug game, and the pimp game, they all do the same thing. Perhaps we see in the story that Boots ultimately tries to kill religion rather than to perpetuate the system of oppression that can't be removed from religion or economics. Maybe in this way he's a Marxist in the activist-y sense. He says that killing Jesus was his road to recovery, in fact. And this echoes the sentiments from Marx that only through the critique of religion will an adequate response to alienation occur. Now that's a lot to swallow. This is a heavy pill. My students leave class on this day feeling work, and I imagine some of you do too, if you stuck around. So I want to thank you. Take your mind off of this. Marx is not going to solve all our problems. He might not solve any of them. But this is an important existential confrontation that religious folks need to have with themselves and with their communities. It's not going to be comfortable, but it will be galvanizing and edifying for those of you who do that. So I hope this video has been helpful, this last section of Lesson 3. So please stay tuned. Lesson 4 will come down soon enough, and we'll continue the conversation involving, is God dead? I'm Christopher Driscoll. I thank you so much for your time and your energy and your effort. Please consider liking and subscribing if this content resonates with you, or if the ASMR content resonates with you. And if you don't like all of it, just skip over the stuff that you don't like and keep checking out the other stuff. I appreciate you. I'm grateful for you. And I'll see you next time.